If I told you that failure was not your enemy, but your greatest teacher, would you believe me? Most people recoil at the thought of failure. They associate it with shame, with rejection, with proof that they were not good enough. But what if failure was never meant to be a permanent judgment? What if instead it was simply a pause, like a comma in the middle of a long sentence, allowing you to breathe, to think, and to redirect before continuing your story? Failure, in truth, is not a full stop. It is not a period at the end of your potential. It is a comma, a brief interruption that gives your journey rhythm and shape. Think of your life as a sentence too important to be cut short. Every stumble, every misstep, every attempt that does not yield what you hoped for, it does not close the book. It merely adds a pause before the next clause of your becoming. Too often we treat failure as the ultimate verdict. One rejection letter, one business that collapses, one relationship that ends, and we tell ourselves the story is over. But failure does not have that authority unless we hand it the pen. The truth is that those who achieve greatness rarely walk a straight, uninterrupted line. Their paths are littered with commas, with side notes, with rewrites. Each failure reshapes their sentence into something richer, wiser, more complete. Take a moment right now to reflect on your own journey. Recall a time you stumbled. Maybe in school, maybe in work, maybe in love. Did that failure end you? No. You are still here. You are listening to these words. The story continued. And in some way, whether you noticed it or not, that failure gave you space to pause and gather strength for what came next. It is in this light that we must begin to see failure differently. It is not a tombstone, but a stepping stone. It is not a collapse, but a pause, a chance to inhale before the next leap forward. The comma in your story may not always feel comfortable, but it ensures the sentence flows with greater meaning. Without commas, words blur together in confusion. Without failures, our growth blurs into arrogance. The pauses give the story power. I want you to imagine an artist at work. She paints not in one unbroken stroke, but in layers. Sometimes she paints over what she thought would be beautiful, realizing it was not quite right. From afar, those strokes look like mistakes, but up close, they are simply commas in her creation, moments where she paused, corrected, and tried again. The painting is not ruined, it is evolving. So it is with your life. And yet we live in a culture that hides its commas. Social media shows only the periods, the finished products, the flawless pictures. Rarely do we see the pauses, the drafts, the rough sketches. We forget that behind every polished success are hundreds of moments when someone nearly gave up. We see the light bulb glowing, but not the 1,000 attempts that preceded it. We admire the company thriving, but not the prototypes that failed quietly in some forgotten garage. So let us tell a different story. Let us begin this audiobook not with the illusion of perfection, but with the reality of trial and error. Let us honor the comma, because the sooner you embrace the pauses in your journey, the sooner you realize you are not broken when you stumble. You are being shaped. But here is the paradox. Not all failures are equal. Some are blind, reckless, careless stumbles that leave us bruised but not wiser. Others are intentional, deliberate, carefully chosen experiments that may look like failure on the surface, but are in truth the fastest path to growth. This is where the art begins, the art of failing on purpose, of designing your pauses so they push you forward. And before we move further into this journey, I want to pause with you for a moment, not to fail, but to connect. If you are listening right now, I invite you to leave a comment, sharing where in the world you are and what time it is as you hear these words. Your story is unfolding in this very hour, and someone else, halfway across the globe, may be listening alongside you. Together, we form a chorus of commas, each of us pausing, each of us learning. And if you want to walk with us through the rest of this exploration, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for Audiobook Sanctuary so you will never miss the next step of this journey. Because the truth is this: you will fail. I will fail. We all will. But the question is not whether failure will come. It is whether we will recognize it as a comma, a pause, an intentional training ground, or whether we will mistake it for the end of our story. So let us turn the page together. Having seen failure, not as a period, but as a comma, let us now look deeper. Not every stumble serves you. Some failures weigh you down, others lift you higher. What separates them? It is time to draw the line between blind failure and intentional failure, between falling in the dark and falling with purpose. Most of us grew up believing that failure is a single, ugly thing. We were told in school that getting an answer wrong meant we weren't smart enough, or that losing a game meant we weren't strong enough. But failure is not a monolith. There are actually two very different types: blind failure and intentional failure. Understanding the difference is the key that unlocks growth. Blind failure is the kind most people dread because it feels meaningless. It happens when we rush without preparation, when we ignore the lessons of others, when we repeat the same mistake without reflection. It is like stumbling in the dark with your eyes closed, hitting the same obstacle over and over again, never stopping to ask why. Blind failure bruises, but it rarely builds. It drains energy instead of creating momentum. Imagine a student who never studies but still hopes to pass an exam. Each time he fails, he shrugs and says, "I'm just unlucky." That is blind failure. Nothing new is learned, no adjustment is made, no awareness is gained. It is a cycle that repeats until discouragement takes root. Many people live their whole lives this way, mistaking stubborn repetition for resilience. But resilience without reflection is just stubbornness, and it does not lead forward. Now, picture another student who studies carefully, but when she receives her test back, she does not despair. Instead, she circles every wrong answer, looks up why she missed them, and seeks guidance. Her failure is not wasted, it is intentional. She treats the exam not as a verdict, but as feedback. That difference transforms what looks like a stumble into a stepping stone. Intentional failure is not reckless, it is strategic. It is a choice to test, to experiment, to push boundaries with the full understanding that you may fall short. But because you approached it with awareness, you are ready to extract the lesson. This is why great inventors, entrepreneurs, and athletes are not afraid of failing repeatedly. They fail with intention. Each misstep contains data. Each collapse holds a clue. Think of it like two climbers on a mountain. One charges upward without a map, ignoring the terrain, and eventually slips into a ravine. That is blind failure. The other climber moves step by step, probing the ground, sometimes choosing a path that doesn't lead higher, but teaches her which routes are dangerous. When she slips, she notes where the rock was loose. When she backtracks, she adjusts her route with precision. That is intentional failure. One climber ends discouraged and lost. The other grows wiser and eventually reaches the summit. In your own life, you can probably recall both kinds. Maybe you once entered a project without preparation, only to find yourself embarrassed and drained. That was blind failure. But perhaps you also remember a time when you tried something new, knowing it might not work, And later you realize the attempt taught you exactly what you needed to move forward. That was intentional failure. The danger is that society often lumps these together, discouraging us from trying at all. We hear, "Don't fail," when what we should be hearing is, "Don't fail blindly." Because failing intentionally, on a small scale with awareness, is one of the smartest moves you can make. It prevents you from failing catastrophically later. It is the art of failing small so you can succeed big. This is why scientists run experiments. They do not expect every test to prove their hypothesis. Most experiments fail. But those failures are not blind. They are carefully measured, documented, and analyzed. Each one narrows the search. Each one clarifies the truth. Without thousands of failed experiments, science would never progress, and without thousands of failed attempts, neither would you. The challenge, then, is to develop the habit of asking after every setback. Was this blind failure or intentional failure? Did I stumble in the dark, or did I learn something new? Did this drain me, or did it equip me? That question alone can change the way you move through life. Blind failure will always be discouraging. Intentional failure will always be empowering. And when you realize that you have the power to choose, you stop being afraid of failure itself. Instead, you start designing it. This is where the stories of the greats become illuminating. Thomas Edison once famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." To many, that sounded like madness. But to Edison, it was simple. Every failure was intentional. Every burnt filament, every shattered bulb, every sleepless night, it all carried a lesson. He was not wandering in the dark. He was charting a map. And that map is what led him eventually to light. As we move forward, let us step into Edison's workshop. Let us hear the scratch of pencils, the hum of machinery, the sigh of another broken bulb. And let us see how the power of intentional failure turned discouragement into illumination. Step into the dim workshop of Thomas Edison, a place cluttered with wires, glass tubes, bits of metal, and pages filled with scribbled notes. The air is heavy with the smell of burnt filaments, the residue of countless attempts that did not glow as intended. To an outsider, the room might look like chaos, like the scene of relentless failure. But to Edison, it was a laboratory of learning, a symphony of commas strung together, each one moving him closer to the brilliance of light. Edison is remembered as the inventor of the light bulb, but history often shortens the story. What people forget is that before the world saw that warm glow, he endured over 1,000 failed experiments. Imagine that, day after day, trial after trial, each one ending in darkness. 1,000 times he could have said, "This is not working, I am done," but he didn't. Instead, he reframed every disappointment in his own words, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Think about the weight of those words. Most people, after 3 or 4 failures, begin to question their worth. After 10, they consider giving up. After 100, they would likely walk away for good. But Edison's perspective turned what looked like a mountain of failures into a staircase of insights. Each step was not an end, but an intentional pause, a comma that carried him further into discovery. What can we learn from this? That persistence alone is not enough. Blind persistence can trap you in circles. What made Edison different was not just his refusal to quit, but his way of failing. His failures were intentional, crafted experiments designed to reveal information. Each trial was a question posed to the universe. Will this material glow? Will it endure? Will it sustain light? And when the answer was no, he did not despair. He took notes. He adjusted. He tried again with one variable changed. Here lies the art of intentional failure in its purest form. Edison did not seek success in a single leap. He built success by failing deliberately, again and again, until the pattern of truth emerged. His workshop was not a graveyard of broken bulbs. It was a field of harvested lessons. Consider how this applies to your own life. Maybe you've tried a project that didn't work. Did you simply walk away with frustration? Or did you record what went wrong, adjust your approach, and try again with new insight? Edison's story reminds us that failure only becomes waste when we refuse to extract meaning from it. When we engage with failure as data, as feedback, as part of a living process, then even 1,000 missteps move us forward. There is also something profoundly human about Edison's persistence. He was not a superhuman immune to discouragement. He felt disappointment just as you and I do. But he had cultivated a mindset that saw value where others saw defeat. Instead of interpreting failure as a verdict, he treated it as conversation. The materials, the wires, the filaments, all spoke back to him with every failed test. And because he listened, because he asked again and again, he eventually heard the answer that illuminated the world. It is easy, in hindsight, to romanticize Edison's journey. But in the moment, it was grueling. Imagine the laughter of skeptics, the doubts of investors, the late nights when nothing worked. Picture the weight of fatigue pressing on his shoulders, yet he chose to continue. This is the hidden cost of greatness, enduring not only failure, but also the perception of failure from those who cannot yet see the bigger picture. Now pause and reflect. How many times have you abandoned an idea after one or two setbacks, declaring it a failure? What if you had reframed those attempts as Edison did, not as the end of the road, but as a narrowing of possibilities, guiding you closer to the answer? How many light bulbs in your own life remain undiscovered because you mistook intentional failure for defeat? The light bulb was not simply a triumph of science. It was a triumph of perspective. Edison's true invention was not the glow of electricity. It was the process of transforming failure into progress. He gave the world a model of resilience that still speaks today. Fail on purpose, fail small, fail repeatedly, but never fail blindly. This is the lesson to carry from Edison's workshop. Success is not a straight line. It is a zigzag of attempts, 1,000 commas in your life sentence, and only those who are willing to write through the pauses will arrive at the brilliance on the other side. And if Edison's 1,000 failures could be turned into one enduring light, what might your handful of failures create if you chose to see them as intentional stepping stones? From this single inventor's persistence, we move into the broader world of modern risk-takers. Entrepreneurs who build companies not to avoid failure, but to learn from it. Just like Edison, they too embrace failure as part of their design, and their stories reveal how intentional loss can become the foundation for lasting success. Picture the buzzing energy of a small startup office. Mismatched chairs, laptops balanced on stacks of books, whiteboards filled with ambitious plans and half-erased equations. The founders are young, hopeful, brimming with ideas. They work late into the night, dreaming of becoming the next household name. And then, reality strikes. The product doesn't fit the market. The users don't stay. The money runs out. The company shutters its doors. To many, this looks like the end, a humiliating failure. But within the world of entrepreneurship, such collapse is not always a tragedy. More often, it is training ground. Silicon Valley has a phrase: fail fast, fail forward. At first, it may sound like reckless optimism, as if people celebrate losing. But what lies beneath this mantra is the same wisdom Edison practiced in his lab. Intentional failure, small, fast, contained, becomes a way to learn lessons that no classroom, no theory could ever teach. When a startup fails, it exposes assumptions that were wrong. It reveals blind spots. It shows the team what the world truly wants, not what they merely hoped it wanted. Take, for example, the story of Audiobook, a podcasting platform created in the mid-2000s. The founders poured time and energy into building it, but then Apple announced that iTunes would include podcasting. Overnight, Audiobook was obsolete. Was that the end? For some, it might have been. But out of that failure emerged something extraordinary. Twitter. The founders, instead of clinging to a broken idea, used their collapse as fuel for reinvention. They asked, "What did we learn? What else can we create with the tools and talent we already have?" Their failure was not blind. It was the pivot point that birthed one of the most influential platforms in modern history. Another story. Before Instagram became the image-sharing giant we know today, it started as a location-based check-in app called Burbine. The app was cluttered, confusing, and nobody really used it. By most measures, it was a failure. But the founders paid close attention to one tiny detail. Users loved posting photos. That observation, born from what didn't work, led them to strip away everything else and focus entirely on photos. Bourbon failed intentionally, and Instagram was born. These stories reveal a deeper truth. Startups are not merely businesses. They are experiments. Each launch, each pivot, each stumble is data. To outsiders, a failed company looks like wasted years. To those inside, it is often the tuition they paid to learn the language of the market. Investors even look for founders who have failed before, not because they enjoy loss, but because those founders now carry scars of wisdom. They have learned not just theories, but the reality of timing, human behavior, and resilience. The lesson here stretches beyond Silicon Valley. You may not be building the next social network or billion-dollar app, but in your own life, you are running a startup every day. Each new project, each risk you take, is an experiment. Some will collapse, some will thrive. The question is not whether you will fail, but whether you will fail with intention. Will you design your experiments so that even when they fail, they leave you richer in knowledge, more prepared for the next iteration? Think of a small bakery that opens in your neighborhood. The owner tries offering 20 kinds of bread, but customers ignore most of them. Instead of clinging to pride, the owner notices that only 3 breads sell well. She drops the rest, refines her recipes, and pours energy into those 3. Was her first attempt a failure? Yes. But was it blind? No. It was intentional. Because she paid attention, she tested, observed, and adjusted. That is the art of failing forward. Failure, when treated this way, becomes a conversation with reality. It strips away illusions and forces us to see what truly works. It keeps us humble, flexible, and tuned to the truth. Startups collapse not because the founders are incompetent, but because they are daring enough to ask questions big enough to risk falling apart. And from those ashes, new questions, and sometimes new revolutions, are born. So pause and consider, where in your life are you clinging to a version of Audiobook, an idea that no longer serves you, that has already been outpaced by the world? Where might your own Instagram be hiding, waiting to be uncovered through the willingness to let something else fail? Because failure, in this sense, is not a tombstone for your dreams. It is the pruning of the tree, the cutting away of what doesn't bear fruit, so that the living branches can grow stronger. The key is to cut with intention, to fail forward, to turn collapse into compost that nourishes the soil of your next creation. From Edison's workshop to Silicon Valley's garages, the principle remains the same. Fail small, fail smart, and fail with purpose. But how do we apply this to our personal lives when we are not inventing light bulbs or billion-dollar apps? The answer lies in learning the science of small experiments, testing life in miniature so that every failure teaches without destroying. Imagine standing before a vast mountain, its peak hidden in the clouds. You know you want to climb it, but you cannot see the path. Charging forward blindly would be dangerous. One wrong step could cost you everything. But what if you could send out small scouts, testing little paths, noting which routes are stable and which are treacherous before you commit to the full ascent? This is the essence of small experiments, controlled failures that guide you safely toward success. Life, in many ways, is an uncharted mountain. We dream of building careers, businesses, relationships, or skills, but we rarely know the exact path that will lead us to the summit. The temptation is to make one giant leap, to risk everything on a single attempt. But history, and our own experience, shows us how fragile that approach can be. Instead, the wise climber tests footholds, listens for the sound of loose stones, and learns as they climb. In science, this is called experimentation. No reputable scientist would ever test a sweeping theory with a single, all-or-nothing trial. They design small experiments, control the variables, and gather data piece by piece. If one experiment fails, it does not ruin the entire endeavor. It simply adds another puzzle piece to the larger picture. In the same way, you can design your life to fail safely, learning at every step without being destroyed by the outcome. Consider someone who wants to start a new business. Instead of pouring their life savings into a full-scale store, they test the idea first, selling online, running a weekend stall, asking for feedback from friends. Each test is a small experiment, designed not to guarantee success, but to gather information. If the product doesn't sell, the loss is minimal, but the lesson is priceless. That feedback allows them to refine, adjust, or even abandon the idea before it consumes their entire future. Small experiments can apply to anything. Want to switch careers? Don't quit your job overnight. Take a course, shadow someone in the field, volunteer for a project. Each small step tells you something about your fit, your passion, your readiness. Want to improve your health? Don't attempt a complete lifestyle overhaul in 1 week. Instead, experiment with one habit. Drink more water, walk each evening, or replace one meal with a healthier option. Each experiment is manageable, and each failure is digestible. What makes these experiments powerful is that they are intentional. They are not reckless gambles, but designed trials. They protect you from catastrophic collapse while still moving you forward. This is the strategy of entrepreneurs, scientists, athletes, and artists alike. They create controlled environments where failure becomes safe, even desirable, because it accelerates learning. Think of a musician learning a new instrument. She doesn't expect to perform a flawless symphony on the first day. She plays scales, fumbles with chords, and experiments with sound. Each wrong note is a small failure, but without those failures, mastery would never come. The same is true for athletes. Every missed shot in practice is a small experiment, shaping muscle memory, refining skill, preparing them for the real game. But here is where many of us falter. We avoid even small failures because of pride. We fear looking foolish, even in private. We want perfection immediately, and so we don't experiment at all. We wait, paralyzed, hoping for certainty that never comes. The tragedy is that in avoiding small failures, we set ourselves up for massive ones. We leap without testing, and the fall is devastating. Instead, embrace the experiment. Tell yourself, I am testing, not failing. When you try something on a small scale, you give yourself permission to learn. The sting of failure becomes lighter. the shame less consuming, because you know the purpose was never to be perfect. It was to gather data. This approach also transforms how we view time. We stop expecting instant success and start valuing progress. Each small experiment, whether it succeeds or fails, moves us one step closer to clarity. Over weeks, months, and years, these accumulated experiments create a map far more reliable than any fantasy of sudden triumph. So ask yourself, what small experiment could you run this week? What step could you take that carries little risk but much potential for insight? Could you test a new idea? Reach out to one new person? Try one new habit? Each of these is a mini laboratory of life, a safe space to fail forward. Because in truth, success is not a single gamble. It is 1,000 experiments, each one lighting a small torch along the path. And when enough torches are lit, the mountain no longer feels impossible. You can see the way forward. And yet, small experiments mean nothing if we do not learn quickly from them. To fail intentionally, we must also fail efficiently, taking in the lessons, adapting, and moving forward without being trapped in regret. Let us turn, then, to the art of learning fast and moving on. Every failure whispers something to you, but the question is whether you are listening. To fail with intention is not just about running small experiments. It is about learning fast, gathering the message hidden in the mistake, and then moving forward without hesitation. Too often we get caught in the weight of failure. We replay it in our minds. We second-guess every move. We let regret slow us down. And in doing so, we miss the very gift failure was trying to give us: feedback. Think of a child learning to walk. They do not spend weeks analyzing why they fell. They simply try again, adjusting balance unconsciously, strengthening their muscles with every attempt. If a child learned the way most adults learn from failure, they might never stand. But children embody the principle we must reclaim: stumble, adjust, keep moving. Each fall is feedback, and because they learn fast, they eventually run. This principle is vital in every arena of life. In business, those who survive are not the ones who never fail, but the ones who shorten the gap between mistake and adaptation. A failed product launch becomes insight for the next release. A missed sales pitch becomes a clue about what the client truly values. The key is speed, gathering the lesson before discouragement takes over. Athletes know this rhythm well. A missed shot in practice is not a tragedy. It is immediate data. They adjust their form, their angle, their timing, and then they try again. The best athletes are not the ones who never miss, but the ones who can miss 100 times in training and still step into the game confident, because each miss refined their accuracy. They have trained themselves to see mistakes not as scars, but as signals. You can practice the same art in your daily life. Whenever you fail, ask yourself 2 questions. What is this teaching me? What will I do differently next time? These questions break the cycle of shame and transform it into strategy. Without them, failure becomes a wound that festers. With them, failure becomes a compass, pointing you forward. But here lies the danger. Many of us confuse reflection with rumination. Reflection is brief, purposeful, designed to extract the lesson. Rumination is endless, repetitive, designed only to keep us trapped in guilt. Reflection says, "This is what I learned. Now I know what to do next." Rumination says, "I should have known better. I can't believe I messed up." One leads to movement, the other to paralysis. To fail intentionally, you must learn to reflect quickly and then move on. This is where emotional discipline becomes crucial. Imagine a potter shaping clay. Every time the clay collapses, she does not curse it for being weak. She gathers it again, reshapes it, and continues. The speed with which she moves from collapse to creation is the difference between mastery and frustration. If she lingered too long over every failed pot, she would never produce anything. So it must be with us. Technology companies often speak of iteration. They release a version of their product, gather feedback, fix the flaws, and release again. Each iteration is a cycle of small failures and fast learning. The companies that succeed are not those who launch perfect products, but those who adapt faster than their competitors. Life itself is an iterative process. You do not need perfection, you need agility. Think of your own failures as drafts of a larger masterpiece. No writer expects the first draft of a novel to be flawless. They write, they edit, they cut, they rewrite. The faster they move through drafts, the closer they get to brilliance. You too are writing drafts of your future. Each failure is simply another version, one step closer to the polished story. So practice the art of the quick turnaround. When you fall, pause only long enough to catch the lesson, then stand up again. Refuse to waste energy on shame. Refuse to give regret more power than it deserves. Let failure pass through you quickly, leaving only the trace of wisdom behind. Because the truth is, your failures are not meant to hold you hostage. They are meant to train your reflexes. The quicker you adapt, the stronger you become. Fail slow, and the world will outrun you. Fail fast, and you will always be ahead, not because you never stumble, but because you know how to rise with speed. And yet, no matter how quickly we learn, failure still carries an emotional weight. Shame, embarrassment, the fear of judgment, they cling to us like shadows. To master the art of intentional failure, we must go deeper, facing the psychology of shame itself. Only then can we be free to use failure as fuel rather than chains. Shame is the silent companion of failure. It creeps in uninvited, whispering that your mistake is not just something you did, but something you are. It convinces you that others are watching, judging, cataloging your every misstep. This is why so many people fear failure more than pain itself, because failure threatens identity. And yet, if we are to master the art of failing intentionally, we must first learn to disarm shame, to transform it from a prison into a teacher. Think back to your earliest memories of failure. Perhaps it was a wrong answer shouted in class, followed by laughter, or a game lost because of your mistake, or a parent's disapproving look when you fell short of expectation. From these moments, shame took root. It linked failure with humiliation. And over time, that link grew so strong that many adults would rather avoid trying altogether than risk the sting of shame. But here is the truth. Shame is not an enemy. It is a signal. Shame tells us that we care, that we value belonging, that we yearn for approval. The problem is not shame itself, but how we interpret it. If we believe shame means we are broken, then failure becomes unbearable. But if we recognize shame as a passing emotion, a flicker of vulnerability that simply points us toward growth, then it can become fuel. Consider the story of J.K. Rowling. Before Harry Potter became a global phenomenon, she faced rejection after rejection from publishers. Each rejection carried the sting of shame, the voice whispering, "You're not good enough." She could have believed it, silenced her voice, and buried her manuscript. Instead, she acknowledged the shame, but did not surrender to it. She allowed herself to feel the sting, then converted it into resolve. That choice transformed failure into the birthplace of one of the most beloved stories in modern history. We see this again in the lives of athletes. A sprinter who false starts on the world stage feels the burn of shame before millions. For some, that shame is crushing. For others, it becomes the memory that sharpens focus, the fire that ensures they never make the same mistake again. The difference is not in the failure, it is in the relationship to shame. So how do we shift this relationship? The first step is to name it. When you fail and shame rises, say to yourself, "This is shame. It is not who I am. It is only a signal." By naming it, you create distance. Shame thrives in silence and secrecy. Once spoken, it begins to lose its grip. The second step is to reframe it. Instead of asking, "What will people think of me now?" ask, "What can I learn that others are too afraid to face?" That reframe turns shame into a badge of courage, proof that you dared to risk what others avoided. Suddenly, failure becomes evidence not of weakness, but of bravery. The third step is to normalize it. Everyone fails. Everyone feels shame. Even the most admired figures in history carried moments of humiliation. Abraham Lincoln lost multiple elections before becoming president. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. Thomas Edison, as we saw, failed 1,000 times. None of them escaped shame. They simply refused to let it define them. You, too, can practice this. Share your failures with trusted friends, not as confessions of guilt, but as stories of growth. When you hear others say, "I failed too," shame shrinks. It thrives in isolation, but withers in community. There is a freedom that comes when you no longer run from shame. Instead of avoiding challenges for fear of humiliation, you begin to embrace them. You realize that every blush of embarrassment is a sign you are stretching, growing, moving beyond comfort. Shame ceases to be a verdict. It becomes a companion that signals you are on the edge of transformation. Remember this: shame only has as much power as the meaning you assign to it. Let it mean I am unworthy, and it chains you. Let it mean I am human and learning, and it releases you. The psychology of shame is not easy to master, but once you begin to see it for what it is, failure loses its sharpest teeth. What once felt like humiliation becomes initiation, a rite of passage into resilience. And as you shed the heavy cloak of shame, you will discover the need to build something new in its place, a kind of emotional armor. Not the armor that hardens you and shuts the world out, but the armor that allows you to walk into failure unafraid, knowing you will emerge stronger no matter what. Once shame has been named, reframed, and loosened from its grip, the next step is to build emotional armor. But this is not the heavy, rigid armor of knights that isolates and restricts movement. This is living armor, flexible, resilient, and designed to protect your core without dulling your humanity. To fail intentionally, you must carry this kind of shield, because every experiment you run, every risk you take, will expose you to judgment, misunderstanding, and loss. Without armor, the sting can stop you. With armor, the sting sharpens you. What does emotional armor look like? At its core, it is the ability to stand firm in your worth even when your effort collapses. It is the quiet knowledge that a failed attempt does not equal a failed self. Too often, we wrap our identity around outcomes. If the project succeeds, we are proud. If it fails, we are ashamed. But emotional armor severs that false connection. It reminds you that your worth is not on trial every time you try. You are not your results. You are the one who dares. Consider a boxer stepping into the ring. No fighter enters believing they will never be hit. They expect impact. They train not only their muscles, but their minds, so that when the blow lands, they do not crumble. Their armor is not invulnerability. It is recovery. They know how to take the hit, regain balance, and keep moving. Emotional armor works the same way. It does not prevent life from striking you. It equips you to withstand the strike without losing yourself. One powerful layer of this armor is self-compassion. When you fail, the inner critic often rushes in with harsh words. "I'm so stupid. I always mess this up. I'll never succeed." These words wound more deeply than any external judgment. To counter them, self-compassion speaks differently. "I tried. I learned. This does not define me. It is not indulgence. It is truth." It keeps you standing when the critic wants you to collapse. Another layer is perspective. Ask yourself, will this failure matter in 5 years? 10 years? Most of the time, the answer is no. What feels like catastrophe today will shrink into a footnote tomorrow. Perspective is armor because it prevents you from magnifying the moment into a lifelong verdict. It keeps the setback in proportion, allowing you to step forward with courage. Community is yet another layer. A soldier with armor still fights stronger when surrounded by allies. In the same way, emotional armor grows sturdier when you share your journey with people who remind you of your worth. When trusted voices say, "This failure does not define you," their words reinforce your own resolve. We were never meant to face failure alone. Connection distributes the weight. Finally, there is the armor of purpose. When you know why you are failing, you can endure almost anyhow. If your failures are serving a greater vision, a dream you hold sacred, they sting less. They become part of the cost you willingly pay. Edison could endure 1,000 failed bulbs because he knew what he was aiming for. Athletes endure endless defeats in training because they know the championship lies ahead. Purpose hardens the armor, reminding you that the blows are not random. They are shaping you for something larger. Building emotional armor does not mean you will stop feeling disappointment. You will still wince, still ache, still doubt at times. But the difference is that those emotions will no longer pierce your core. They will glance off the armor, leaving you intact. Instead of retreating after each failure, you will keep advancing, shield raised, heart steady. And here is the irony. When you walk into the world with emotional armor, you actually become more open, not less. You dare more, risk more, share more, because you know you can withstand the sting. The armor frees you to live boldly. Without it, you remain trapped in hesitation, forever fearing the wound of failure. So ask yourself, what armor are you already wearing? Where do you need to strengthen it? Perhaps you need to practice kinder self-talk. Perhaps you need to widen your perspective. Perhaps you need to seek allies who remind you of your worth. Or perhaps you need to reconnect with your deeper purpose so that every failure feels like part of a sacred quest. Because with emotional armor, failure ceases to be a knockout blow. It becomes a push, a shove, a reminder to refine your stance. And when you are armored in resilience, the setbacks you once feared become tools you wield. Now, with shame disarmed and armor built, it is time to take failure to its highest use, not just as a personal lesson, but as a strategic weapon. The next step is learning how to turn every setback into strategy, every stumble into a stronger direction forward. Every stumble can either sit in your memory as a wound or stand in your toolbox as a weapon. The choice is yours. Once you have begun to disarm shame and wrap yourself in emotional armor, you are no longer vulnerable to failure in the same way. You can step back, look at the pieces of what fell apart, and ask, how can this setback become a strategy? This is where the art of intentional failure begins to blossom into wisdom. Think of military generals who lose battles but win wars. History is full of commanders who, instead of clinging to pride, studied their defeats like textbooks. They examined where their soldiers faltered, where the enemy anticipated them, where their supply lines failed. Each lost battle became a manual for how to win the next. In the same way, your failures are not ruins to be swept away. They are maps. Within them lies the cartography of your future victories. Consider a young entrepreneur who launches a product that flops. At first glance, it is money wasted, energy drained. But when she reviews customer feedback, she sees patterns. The features people hated reveal what not to pursue. The features people loved, though too few to save the launch, point toward her next design. That failed product becomes her research. When she tries again, she does not start from scratch. She starts with intelligence, sharper than before. Even in relationships, failure can become strategy. A broken friendship or failed romance often teaches more about your needs, your boundaries, and your blind spots than any success could. If you are willing to analyze it, not with bitterness, but with curiosity, you discover strategies for building stronger, healthier connections in the future. What looked like heartbreak becomes a manual for deeper love. The key is reflection with intent. After each failure, sit down and ask 3 questions. What specifically went wrong? What does that reveal about reality, about me, about others? How can I use this knowledge in my next attempt? These questions transform raw pain into refined strategy. Without them, failure is wasted. With them, failure becomes leverage. We can see this clearly in the life of Walt Disney. Before he created the empire we know today, Disney faced bankruptcy, rejection, and the collapse of early ventures. But instead of discarding these experiences, he used them as blueprints. He learned where he had underestimated costs, how he had misjudged audiences, and where his business practices had been naive. Each collapse etched strategies into his mind. By the time he built Disneyland, those failures had become part of its foundation. The same is true in smaller, quieter ways. Imagine someone trying to learn a new language. At first, they mispronounce words, confuse grammar, and feel embarrassed. But if they record their mistakes, reflect on them, and adjust, each error becomes a strategy. A word to practice more, a pattern to pay attention to, a cultural nuance to respect. What once brought humiliation now builds fluency. The difference between stumbling and strategizing is perspective. To stumble is to stop at the pain. To strategize is to turn around, examine the terrain, and chart a smarter path forward. Both begin with failure, but only one ends with growth. Let me offer you a metaphor. Picture a sculptor with a block of marble. Every strike of the chisel could be seen as destruction. Pieces fall away, shards scatter. But to the sculptor, each strike is intentional. Even the chips that crack off in unexpected ways can guide the next stroke. A less patient artist might throw the block away, calling it ruined. But the true artist studies the fracture, adapts, and uses it to shape the figure hidden within. Failure, when treated strategically, sculpts you into who you are meant to become. Ask yourself, what setbacks in your life are waiting to be turned into strategies? Where have you been so focused on the pain of what went wrong that you have not mined the wisdom buried inside? Could that failed project be teaching you about timing? Could that rejection be pointing you toward a better fit? Could that mistake be highlighting a strength you overlooked? When you begin to see failures this way, your relationship to them shifts entirely. They no longer appear as closed doors, but as signposts redirecting you to a wiser path. You begin to trust that even in loss, you are gaining. And this trust leads to something deeper, courage. Because once you know that every failure can be turned into strategy, the fear of trying again diminishes. You step forward boldly, knowing that even if you fall, you will rise with new intelligence. And so, from setbacks, we now move to this courage. The courage not just to recover, but to try again and again, no matter how many times you fall. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite fear. And nowhere is courage tested more deeply than in the aftermath of repeated failure. To try once is easy. To try twice is admirable. But to rise after falling again and again, that is the courage that forges greatness. Imagine the athlete who misses the winning shot in a championship game. The crowd groans, the headlines criticize, and the memory haunts them. In that moment, it would be simpler to quit, to retreat into anonymity. But the athlete laces their shoes the next morning, walks back into the gym, and begins practicing again. That is courage, the refusal to let one failure define an entire future. History brims with such examples. Abraham Lincoln lost election after election before finally becoming president. Each loss was a wound to his pride, a temptation to withdraw. But he chose to try again, drawing strength not from past success, but from a vision of what could be. His courage was not in his victories, but in his endurance. The same spirit shines in inventors, artists, entrepreneurs, and ordinary people who refuse to stop. Every time they rise, they chip away at the fear that once paralyzed them. Every attempt becomes easier, not because the risk has vanished, but because they have trained their hearts to see failure not as an ending, but as a rehearsal. Courage to try again is like a muscle. It grows only through use. The first time you rise after falling, it feels impossible. Your body is heavy with doubt, your mind clouded with shame. But you take one step anyway. The next time, the weight is lighter. The time after that, lighter still. Soon rising becomes instinct. You fail, you rise, you stumble, you stand. This rhythm becomes the heartbeat of resilience. But how do you cultivate this courage? The first step is to remember your why. When your reason for trying is greater than your fear of failing, you find strength you didn't know you had. Purpose fuels courage. Edison's purpose was light. Lincoln's was justice. What is yours? If you can answer that, you will always find the will to rise. The second step is to shrink the battlefield. Do not demand of yourself a massive triumph after each fall. Instead, focus on one small act of courage. One more attempt, one more experiment, one more step. Success is built not on dramatic comebacks, but on steady persistence. Like drops of water carving stone, repeated courage shapes your destiny. The third step is to reframe failure itself. Each time you try again, you are not starting over from zero. You are starting from experience. You carry forward the lessons, the scars, the wisdom of every past attempt. This means you never truly return to square one. Every try is higher ground. Every attempt begins closer to the summit. Think of a child learning to ride a bicycle. They fall dozens of times, skinning knees, bruising elbows. But each fall teaches balance. Eventually they ride not because they never fell, but because they always got back up. If a child has the courage to try again, why should we, as adults, demand perfection from ourselves before daring another attempt? Courage also requires community. Alone, it is easier to give up. Surrounded by others who believe in you, rising becomes natural. A word of encouragement, a reminder of your worth, a friend who says, "Try again, you can do it," often becomes the spark that ignites courage. If you are struggling to rise, find allies who will lift you. And be that ally for others. Your encouragement may be the reason someone else dares one more time. Ultimately, courage is a choice. No one can force it upon you. But every time you choose to rise, you reinforce the truth that failure is not final. You write a new sentence after the comma. You take another step up the mountain. And here is the miracle. The more often you choose courage, the less terrifying failure becomes. It loses its power to paralyze. You begin to see failure as a companion, not a foe, an inevitable part of the journey, but one you are no longer afraid to walk beside. From here, we arrive at the final revelation. Failure, when embraced with intention, is not just survivable. It is the shortest path to lasting success. Let us step into this truth together. At the heart of every great story lies a paradox. The very thing we fear most often hides the key to what we desire most. Failure, though dreaded, is in fact the most direct path to success. Not the blind, reckless failures that leave us broken, but the intentional ones. The small, calculated risks that teach us more in one stumble than 100 careful plans ever could. Think of success as a fortress. Many people spend their whole lives circling its walls, searching for a gate that doesn't exist. They wait for the perfect opportunity, the flawless plan, the guarantee of victory. But the fortress never opens that way. The hidden door lies in failure. Every misstep, every wrong turn, every collapse chips away at the wall until, suddenly, a passage appears. Those who refuse to fail never find it. Those who fail intentionally walk through it sooner. This is why the world's greatest innovators, leaders, and creators are not the ones who avoided failure, but the ones who befriended it. Edison's 1,000 experiments, Lincoln's repeated defeats, Disney's bankruptcies, Rawlings' rejections, the endless pivots of startups, all point to one truth. Intentional failure is the price of long-term success. Not a penalty, not a punishment, but a tuition fee in the school of greatness. And the cost is always worth paying, because every failure intentionally faced shortens the distance to your goal. It is like crossing a river on stepping stones. Each stone may be slippery, some may tip, but everyone carries you closer to the far shore. Refuse to step for fear of falling, and you will remain stranded. Step boldly, knowing you may slip but will rise again, and the far bank becomes inevitable. Here is the beauty. Intentional failure does not just move you toward achievement, it transforms who you are. With each stumble you design, you become less fragile and more resilient. With each mistake you dissect, you become sharper in judgment. With each setback you endure, you become braver, more alive, more unshakably human. Success is not only about what you gain, but about who you become in pursuit of it. So let us make this vow together, to stop fearing the fall and start designing it, to run small experiments, to learn quickly, to turn shame into wisdom and setbacks into strategy, to wear emotional armor and rise with courage again and again. For in the end, the shortest road to long-term success is paved not with perfection, but with purposeful failures. Pause for a moment and think of your own life. What is one area where you have been waiting, hesitating, holding back because you fear failure? What if, instead, you chose to fail on purpose, safely, strategically, intentionally, so you could gather the lessons you need? How much sooner would you arrive at the success you seek? Failure is not the end of your story. It is the comma, the pause, the redirection. Treat it as such, and you will write a sentence far richer and stronger than one without interruption. Refuse it, and your story may remain unfinished. Now, as we close this journey, let us gather the threads of all we have explored and tie them together in a final reflection. A reminder that failure with intention is not your downfall, but your greatest ally. Failure with intention is not a detour. It is the road itself. The stories we admire most, from inventors to artists to entrepreneurs, all share this same rhythm. Try, fail, learn, try again. Success is never born in one flawless act. It is sculpted, piece by piece, from fragments of failed attempts. Too often we treat failure as disqualification, as if it proves we are unworthy of our dreams. But failure is not the judge of your worth. It is the trainer of your character. Every small stumble you choose to endure keeps you from the devastating collapse of a blind leap. Every intentional failure is a rehearsal, preparing you for the stage where your true success will unfold. Think of the archer drawing a bow. To send the arrow flying forward, they must first pull it back. That backward motion, that tension, feels like retreat. But it is the necessary step that gives the arrow its power. Failure works the same way. Each setback is the pull that readies you for greater flight. Without the pull, there is no distance. Without the stumble, there is no strength. So let us redefine what it means to win. To win is not to avoid failure. It is to fail wisely, to fail often, to fail with purpose. To win is to transform every misstep into momentum, every shame into strength, every stumble into strategy. The ones who walk this path may look clumsy to the outside world, but they are in fact sprinting toward mastery. And let us remember, this is not just theory. You will feel it in your bones. You will fail. You will feel the sting of embarrassment, the weight of disappointment. But when that moment comes, breathe deeply and remember this. You are not broken. You are being trained. This failure is not a wall. It is a doorway. Walk through it and you will emerge stronger, wiser, and closer to the life you seek. So go ahead, fail small, fail fast, fail with intention. Embrace each fall as the tuition of greatness. Because every time you stumble with purpose, you are not moving backward. You are moving closer to the future that is waiting for you. And one day, when you stand on the summit of your success, you will look back at the trail of failures behind you and realize they were not obstacles at all. They were the very stones that carried you here. Failure with intention is the shortest path to long-term success. Take it boldly, for it belongs to you.